and you see what it took. You see the preparation, you see the professionalism, you see the fun that they were having. You see how they included and treated every person that was on that show like a member of a team. And I lived that out a lot with Bob Lee at ESPN on Outside the Lines, a show I worked on for 4 years. And I saw how great Bob was, maybe the best interviewer I've ever been around or seen, the best listener that I've ever been around and seen. But Bob was so inclusive. He created such a great culture and an environment for people to feel like they mattered and were important. And that's not an easy thing to do when you're on the pedestal and being seen by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people every day.
Welcome to the Next Level Journalist, where you will hear from some of the best journalists in the business or who have been there, done that, and willing to share with you what they've learned so you can get better, faster. My guest today is a former ESPN producer and manager. He is an author, he is a speaker, he is the host of the Sports Spectrum podcast. Jason Romano, thank you so much for making time for this conversation.
Yeah, Kyle, thanks for having me, man. So good to talk to you.
You as well. And look, I mentioned author. Congratulations on your latest book, The Uniform of Leadership, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, buddy.
That book, congratulations on the book. Well done. As a former TV sports journalist myself, I appreciated the stories that you shared with household names that we all have come to know and love, that, we see them on our TV. So to get those lessons that you shared throughout there, I thought was just a great idea. And anyone who wants to get better, not just in sports journalists, but anyone in general can get better at their craft from reading that book. So congratulations and well done on that.
Thank you, buddy. Yeah, it's always weird when you release a book. I've done two of them now. And whenever you say author, I just shake my head because I know we're going to talk a lot about, the broadcasting and media side. And that's what I always consider myself, like a producer and a guy who creates content, but author, not something I ever envisioned, but I'm glad that it's encouraging a lot of people.
Yeah, no doubt. And if anybody picks that up again, that will open their eyes to so much, because that's where people will really grow, in between the years there. So hopefully people are picking that up and reading it, because it will make an impact. So, I give the 30,000 foot view of who Jason is, but you tell us, give us a rundown of your career journey, if you will.
Career journey. I, started in 1997 when I graduated college. So I just dated myself and told you how old I am, which is fine. Mid-40s guy. But in 97, I graduated from State University of New York at New Paltz, which is one of the state schools in upstate New York, and went to school specifically to get into broadcasting. So that was my dream coming out of high school. And went to a 2-year school initially, community college, got my associate's degree in broadcasting from this community college. It's called Cayuga Community College in Auburn, New York. And then took a couple years off because I was 19 and an idiot and didn't really know what I wanted to do and how to go about doing it. But learned a lot in those 1.5, 2 years that I took off. Then went back to school. I had this awakening, I guess, when I was 21 years old, working at a hospital, living in my own apartment, realizing that this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And the same awakening happened to my roommate, who was one of my best friends. And we both decided to go back to school. And I went and finished my last 2 years at New Paltz, got my degree. And really then, I guess that would have been 1995, said, I want to do whatever it takes to get into this business, because this is my dream and my passion. And got out of college in 97 and went to back home, basically, back to my hometown of Albany, New York. Worked in local radio as a producer, morning show and afternoon show, talk show producer, which was a lot of fun, cutting teeth and just getting my start in the business. And then ESPN happened, and that's a crazy story in itself. And got there in 2000, and I worked for 17 years at ESPN as a producer, both on the radio side, the television side, and then eventually in the last few years on the digital and social media side, and then left 3 years ago in 2017 from ESPN to pursue what I'm doing now, which is in essence sports ministry for those that maybe followers of Jesus and are Christians, understanding that word ministry, but really it's media. I mean, we're doing a podcast and a radio show and creating content, video content, online content on our website with Sports Spectrum. So that's what I've been doing. And you mentioned the books, and writing books and releasing those and speaking across the country as well when we could before a pandemic hit. So that's the whole journey in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Jason. And you worked with basically a who's who, as we've already talked about, of broadcasters at ESPN. With that in mind, what did you learn from those who's of who at ESPN? And I'm sure it's immense amount. Actually, I know it is because a lot of it's in your book. But, when you think about, what you learned from them that you can share with us.
Yeah. So you're referring to a lot of the people that we would know by watching ESPN, certainly. And the guys like, I remember coming in 2000, it was Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann and Rich Eisen, Stuart Scott, Linda Cohn, legends in the business, Chris Berman, Bob Lee, people that you watched since you were a little kid. And so you get to meet those people and kind of interact with them on certain levels. Some were a little deeper and closer relationships than others, but you're still watching the legends of the business. Mike and Mike, I didn't even mention those guys. And, they're legends in the radio side. So there's a lot, but there are tons of people behind the scenes too, who, if you're in the business, you may know a few of the names, but for the most part, not many people know who they are. And they're the ones doing incredible work as producers, as bosses, as senior producers, as coordinating producers. There's tons of titles, right? But there's stuff that I learned from everyone. I will say the one thing that I learned that's sort of overarching and involves all of the people that I've been around that were really great was how to be a pro. How to take your job seriously, but also have fun within it, but understand that you are called to be excellent at what you do and to do the best you can to be excellent. We all fail, obviously, at that. We've all messed up. Certainly I have. I honestly didn't know initially in the first few years if I was even, I hate to say this, but if I was even good enough to work at ESPN. I felt that pressure very early on when I got there at 26 years old and thinking, I don't think I belong here. Like, I'm just a kid from this small town in New York who dreamed of working in local radio, which I did. And here I am at ESPN, which is, I guess, a dream job, but I didn't dream that big enough, to be honest. But watching and seeing the people that I was around, and I was in awe of it for a little bit, but probably after a few months, I realized, no, you're hired to do a job here. So learn from the people that are already here and put in the best work that you can and try to be as great as you can and, do your work with excellence. So I think that was the biggest thing, is the professionals being around. When you're at a place like ESPN, Kyle, you are working with the best of the best. And so I think you've heard that, you kind of maybe see that from afar, but when you're in the middle of it, you're in the trenches and you're watching, I liken it to, and it's not really a great comparison, but I've heard some people in football say when they got to play with like a Tom Brady or a Drew Brees, and they get there and they say, oh, that's why they're so great. Like, you hear it and you see it from afar. Maybe you play against them, but then you play with them and you say, oh, now I understand. And for me, I think it wasn't one of those, I had played against a Drew Brees type and then now I'm playing with him. But there was certainly me watching Bob Lee on television or Chris Berman on Sunday NFL Countdown every single week from the time I was 15 until I was, working at ESPN. And then you're with them and you see what it took. You see the preparation, you see the professionalism, you see the fun that they were having. You see how they included and treated every person that was on that show like a member of a team. It wasn't like, I'm the guy that you see on TV and the rest of these people don't matter. And certainly there might have been a few of those, but for the most part, everybody understood that Chris Berman cannot do his job on television and be as great as he was for so many years without 15, 20, 30 people around him behind the scenes that all have to do their job well to make Chris Berman look great on television. And I lived that out a lot with Bob Lee at ESPN on Outside the Lines, a show I worked on for 4 years. And I saw how great Bob was, maybe the best interviewer I've ever been around or seen, the best listener that I've ever been around and seen. But Bob was so inclusive. He created such a great culture and an environment for people to feel like they mattered and were important. And that's not an easy thing to do when you're on the pedestal and being seen by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people every day. And so I don't know if that fully answers your question, Kyle, but that's what I saw. I just saw excellence, and I saw guys who made sure that the team knew that they were important. It wasn't just about the person that was on camera.
Yeah, Jason, you answered questions 2, 3, and 4. So, but no. So if you could give us, I'm sure every day was different. I was in TV. I realized every day was different. But for you, what did your daily grind? And I know you had different roles along the way, during your time there. But if you give us an idea of what your day to day looked like, and it could be with, when you're working with Bob or working with Mike and Mike,
Sure.
what your day looked like. If you could take us inside of ESPN.
Can I give you 3 different days, and I'll do it quickly?
Absolutely.
Because I worked in radio, then I worked in television, then I worked in social media and digital media. So those days were each different, sort of the same, but different. So when I worked in radio, I worked primarily on a show called Game Night, which was on ESPN Radio from 2001 to 2003. I did get my start in radio with Mike and Mike, but that was like the first 10 months of my journey at ESPN. And I was sort of the booker for the show. So I wasn't in the trenches on the show every single day in the studio, whatever. I mean, the studios were tiny back then. But from 2001 to 2003, I was the line producer at ESPN Radio. So I would come in, the show started at 7 o'clock, I think, and it would end at 11. At the tail end of my stint on that show, it ended at 1 a.m. So we were doing either 4-hour shows or in some cases 6-hour shows on the radio. That's a long time to be doing a show. But I would come in probably around 2 for a 7 o'clock show, and I'd leave usually right after the show was done, probably a half hour after the show was done. I'd head home. So I'd get home like midnight or so. But that was a show that was geared towards exactly what the title is, Game Night. So there were games on, and your job was to react and really provide the listener with a picture of what was happening in the world of sports, but also being current, getting updates. We had what we call stringers that worked on ESPN Radio, who were basically reporters at the games, especially baseball and basketball and hockey even, and they would call in and we would get an update. Okay, let's go to Yankee Stadium and get an update from Ed Randall on the Yankees-Red Sox game. And he would give us an update maybe 3 times a show on what was happening. So I would come in, and a lot of what was happening on that radio show, you couldn't really prepare for. We would always schedule 3 to 4 guests for every show, reporters and different people, because you would have those times when, it was like the 3rd inning of a ton of games and there wasn't a lot of games ending. So you would need to fill some time there, and we would have different guests on to come on the show. And then we would have post-game guests quite often on our show. So when a game was over, a stringer would go and he would get a player would call in for like 2-3 minutes, answer a few questions about the game, and then say goodbye. So that was kind of what my day was like. There was a lot of editing that was involved. I was also working on a show called The Legends on ESPN Radio, so I was editing that show and booking that show as well. And I worked with a guy named Chuck Wilson, who was a guy who pioneered and one of the first on-air people ever at ESPN Radio. And I worked with him and a guy named Chris Moore, and we had such a blast. They had a really good rapport, got to travel a little bit, go to some different places, and it was a lot of fun. Middle job was for the 8-9 years I moved to television, and I was a talent producer for ESPN Television. I also line produced a couple of television shows outside the lines. I did about 45 outside the lines line producing with Bob Lee. But for the most part, my primary job was to be a talent booker, a talent producer. So I was gathering the guests that you would see on ESPN shows. Most of them were via phone or remote, but a lot of them would come to ESPN and go through what we call the ESPN car wash, which I wrote a lot about in my most recent book. But that day would be a little different because this was 2004, 2005, in the advent of what they called PDAs back then, but are now the iPhone and, cell phones, and being able to get your email, being able to text, being able to do all these things that were just coming into play in 2004, 2005. And what that did for me and so many at ESPN was that meant when you left ESPN, if you so chose, you could be working basically all the time because you had your access to email. You had texting wasn't even really a big thing until probably 2006 for my job, but you had the ability to take work home with you in a different way now because of mobile phones. And, that's not always a good thing because you had to separate work from home. At least I felt like I had to. but I wasn't very good at that. And so I was booking all the time. My hours varied, but for the most part would have been, I would say, go in at 8:30 to 9 for a 3 or 4 o'clock show, and then leave around 6. So it's kind of a normal shift for a person, 8 to 6, Monday through Friday. Uh, Certainly you and I both know, working in sports, 8 to 5 Monday through Friday is not the norm. Like, sports happen at nights and on the weekends for the most part. So I did my share of nights and weekends too. And sometimes I would work a Sunday shift, especially working on the NFL project. I would come in Sunday morning and stay till about 8 o'clock at night, Sunday night, watch all the games at ESPN. And then Monday through Thursday, I would work a majority of my hours at ESPN and then come home and be off Friday and Saturday. But even on my off days, Kyle, this was the hard part, especially in the middle of that talent producing journey. I was still booking guests. I was still checking my email. I was still maintaining relationships, checking in. Hey, is your client available to come on NFL Live? So it was a lot of relationship building, I would say, in the middle part of my career there. And quite frankly, a lot of those relationships I still have today that I was able to include in the book and other areas, and even into my journey as a podcaster now. But my last 4 years was working on social media. And that was interesting because the games are all day long. And I was in charge. I basically helped create the NFL social media division at ESPN. And so I launched a Twitter account in 2012. We launched a Twitter account because it wasn't just me. And we built that up, and then built Instagram and built Facebook. And, I hate to say it, but those hours for me were really all over the place. And I always felt like I had to be on, even more than when I was a booker, because the games are all day long, all night long. They're Sunday all day, Sunday night, Monday, in essence, all day, because you're reacting to Sunday, and then Monday night. And then you have games on Thursdays nights as well. And to find time to have off, and to schedule content, and to have, make sure that your feed is current, and, information and content is going out at all times of the day when you're really working by yourself for the most part for a couple of years, that was really hard, really hard. And I did feel like I was always on, and that I couldn't let go of what, I couldn't stop looking at my phone, and couldn't make sure, keep looking at what was happening in sports. And if a guy got hurt in the NFL, I had to get this tweet out before I get back to my family. So there was a lot of good, because I wanted to be great and excellent at my job, but there was a lot of really difficult decisions I had to make to balance the work life. And so that was pretty much it. I will say lastly, and I know that I went a little long here, Kyle, but my job on Mike and Mike, my last year as their social director, that was consistent hours, waking up at 4 in the morning and getting in the office by 4:30 and leaving around 1 o'clock. And the show was from 6 to 10. So I would get there around 4:30 into the studio and start preparing for the show, look at what happened the night before, get some ideas ready. And then it was a lot of reacting once the show started with what Mike and Mike had to say, and kind of manning their handles and their digital content, social content. And then we would have a post-show meeting when the show was over at 10:30. We'd actually have 2 post-show meetings, one with Greeny and Golick and then one with just the staff. And then we would kind of prepare what might happen for the next day, what guests we're going to be on. I would cut some content from Mike and Mike's show and post that. And then you kind of have to be on your phone, not all the time, but throughout the day. We had this running email with the whole staff on it, including myself, that would just pitch ideas, pitch segment, ideas, pitch guests that could be on the show. And, even like fun, like social media, I don't know what we call them, I guess, calls to action, I guess is what you call them. So we had a lot of variety, and we were communicating pretty well, but that was kind of what we were doing. And again, I'm sorry I went so long, but I really did have a lot of different, no day was the same.
Yeah, no, I love that, because everybody, that sees this, it's not just for, a TV journalist. It could be somebody who wants to get in the radio, either, in front of, behind the camera, behind the mic,
Yeah.
So many different routes. And I appreciate you sharing just your perspective on each one, because you covered a lot of bases there. So with that said, you've experienced success at ESPN, and being at Sports Spectrum, that's a great achievement in and of itself. Like you mentioned before, anybody that knows that, where the faith and sports intersect, I love that personally. what do you credit your success to in your journey of what you've been able to achieve thus far?
Well, I always start with God because that's just me personally. My credit, in the book that I just wrote, I took a line from a book by Rick Warren called Purpose Driven Life. And it says, the first part of it is, it's not about you. And the idea of wearing the uniform of leadership is not about me. It's about others, and it's about God. So I always give my credit to God first, just because of the way that he has shaped me and helped me find more purpose in my life. But it's always about others. I give credit to so many people. I mean, when I left ESPN, I had this Facebook post, which ended up getting posted on Twitter too. And I listed about 10 specific people. I could have listed 100, but I listed about 10 specific people who meant so much to me during my ESPN journey. And I had written this probably 2-3 weeks earlier and kept editing it and updating it. I felt like I was writing a book in a lot of ways, or a paper for school. And I said, I got to get this right because I don't want to miss the people who meant so much to me and impacted me on my journey. So I think early on about people like Pete Genesini and Justin Craig, who were the main producers on Mike and Mike. When I first got to ESPN, those were the guys that I was watching and learning from. Pete was the senior producer, the main producer on Mike and Mike, and Justin was the sort of associate producer. Both those guys are in high management level positions at ESPN right now. And I love talking about the good old days 20 years ago and just thanking them for bringing in this new guy who came from this small radio station, small town, I should say, and, didn't really know what he was doing. And they really helped me. They didn't act like a bully or say, come on, just they helped me through and taught me a lot. Then I get to the TV side and I think about people like Bob Lee, who I mentioned earlier on air, who was such a great mentor and friend, and really was the first person that ever said to me, you have what it takes to do this job at ESPN as a producer. You can do this. And when you hear that from a Bob Lee, a Hall of Famer, a legend, like that just puts so much confidence in yourself. So I appreciate Bob. I think of people like Ronnie Forsheimer and Tim Hayes, who meant so much as coordinating producers on Outside the Lines and gave me an opportunity to work on that show and learn how television works every single day at ESPN, which I had not really worked on in the past. So that was a huge bump. I think of people like Carol Mayer, who's now Carol Veroniak since she got married. And Carol is the best boss I ever had and was a colleague before she became my boss in our booking department. And I wrote about Carol because she impacted me so much that I had to include her in my book, because she was someone who created a culture within our little 5 to 6 person team as talent bookers that meant that every single day when we came to work, we were a family. We went to battle together. We had each other's back, and she created that environment. It's one thing to go to work and just do your job. It's another thing to go to work and be around a team that you want to go to war with every day. And I know it's like cliche, go to war, right? But it really is going to the ESPN craziness every single day. We had to have each other's back to do that. So Carol was a huge impact. And Carol not only gave me an opportunity to work on the NFL project, but Carol also, as a person of faith, and really we started to connect in a spiritual way, which allowed us to both help each other and understand that we were here at ESPN for something bigger than just a paycheck or ourselves. And we navigated that along with my other colleague, Lisa, who I wrote about in the book too. We navigated that together. And it was always this sort of overarching theme that we knew was there. We weren't overtly pushing faith, or would never even think about pushing faith into the workplace. That wasn't why we were there. But just knowing that we all kind of were aligned spiritually and had each other's backs was huge. And so I credit those guys. And then I think of a guy named Gabe Goodwin, who isn't at ESPN anymore, but Gabe was just climbing through the ranks at ESPN at a very young age, under the age of 30, and worked up to the point where he was basically managing and running our social media department when he came calling to me in 2012 and said, hey, I think you're really smart. You get social media and you love the NFL. What do you think about starting the NFL division of our social media here at ESPN? And he gave me this opportunity to step out of this world of booking and go into the social digital world. And it changed my life in a lot of ways, because that pivot, that move to social media allowed me to grow a division in a department and really go into a new space that a lot of us weren't sure what we were doing. We were just trying to figure it out as we were going. And now if you look at ESPN social media, it's off the charts great. And I always think back to 2011, 2012, when we were first starting it out and how far it's come. And just still understanding that it's less than 10 years old, this department. It's not that old. And it's still very new, and we're still trying things and learning things. And Gabe gave me this amazing opportunity. And then lastly, Steve Brabant, who worked with Gabe, is another producer who's not at ESPN anymore and running things in a different organization. But Steve's the first person that said to me, him and a guy named Mike Buckland, hey, what do you think about Mike and Mike going to work with them? And my last year, Kyle, at ESPN was the most fun I've ever had at ESPN. It was amazing. Working on Mike and Mike for just that 1 year opened up doors that I didn't think were even possible, because that show was seen and heard by so many people. And I didn't understand that my speaking and going and traveling around the country and even writing a couple books, a lot of that may not have happened. I'm not saying it wouldn't have, but it probably would not have happened if I hadn't worked on Mike and Mike for just that 1 year. So I have so many people to thank. That was just a few.
Sure. Well, with all that said, when did you know it was time to leave ESPN?
I didn't know until I finally did it, if it was the right time. And honestly, it probably took about 3 months after I left to really see that this was where I felt like I was being led to or called to do. It started out a couple years earlier, 2015, when I was thinking, do I want to spend the rest of my life working at ESPN, rest of my career? And I did a lot of soul searching, a lot of prayer. And I felt like I kept feeling in my heart that I don't have a problem with staying at ESPN for the rest of my life, certainly. I mean, it was an amazing place to work.
Right.
But if I do want to leave or pivot, it's got to happen sooner than later, because I think if I got into my 50s and I was working at ESPN, I become very comfortable and not want to mess. When you're later in your career, it's like, I'm just going to ride this thing out. Let's just go until they tell you can't work anymore, which did unfortunately happen to a lot of people. But for me, I think I was 43 at the time, 42. And I was thinking, all right, if I'm going to pivot, sort of halftime of my life, halftime of my career, right? Let's do it now, or let's see if there's an opportunity to do it now instead of waiting and then wishing you hadn't. And that was really not something I was pursuing as far as a specific job. I really just focused on building relationships with people outside of ESPN and just kind of let the chips fall where they may. And through that, and I mean building a good 30 or 40 relationships that last year and a half, 2015, 2016. And a lot of those people were not even in broadcasting. They were people who were authors, who were speakers, who were people who worked in nonprofits, even some pastors, just different people in different specters and spheres of influence that I could talk to, learn from, and tell them a little bit about my journey, but really learn about theirs. And through that, an opportunity came with the Sports Spectrum brand to potentially leave and go help rebuild that brand up and kind of intersect my two passions, which are sports and faith, and the talent and the skills that I had acquired for 20 years in both local radio and then at ESPN, being able to take those, and for me at least, to use them for what I like to say is a greater purpose, and talk about things that are really more important, I think, than sports, which are faith, matters of faith, matters of family, matters of life, that a lot of these guys and gals that we talk to normally don't have an opportunity to have a conversation about, to go deeper than just talking about sports. And listen, I love sports. I'm the biggest sports fan still there is. I go crazy when my teams win. I suffer when my teams lose, just like everybody else. But I also know now that that's just sports. I mean, when a guy gets hurt, I have so much more sympathy and empathy for a player when they get hurt now than I did even when I was working at ESPN, because I know a lot of these guys and I know how hard they worked, and I know what kind of dedication that they put in. And when you pull that away and you say, oh, he tore his knee and he's out for the year, man, I just weep with those guys, man. I feel so bad for them. But now that I get to intersect my world of sports and broadcasting and media with things of greater importance to me, I'm living in my sweet spot. And so again, I say that to say it wasn't an easy decision to leave at all. In fact, it didn't make sense, Kyle. I took a 40% pay cut and moving into a place that was a contract job with no benefits and I had to work from home and then travel to Colorado once a month. So it didn't make a lot of sense initially when I left. But as I said, after 3-4 months, and I'm looking back at that decision and kind of looking at where my life had taken to me with the books and the speaking and other things along with this sports spectrum world, I'm living in my sweet spot right now. And that's what I always tell young people is try to pursue that sweet spot. What is your sweet spot? It's the intersection of what you're good at with what you're passionate about. And try to marinate those two together. And that's when you're living in your sweet spot. And I feel like for me, I've always been pretty good at the broadcasting, producing side. And I love what I'm doing in that world. And I'm intersecting those two. And man, I feel like I'm just living the dream even more than I was at ESPN.
Wow, that's awesome. And that's great stuff. I mean, especially advice for younger people, and, good for you, finding that sweet spot. I mean, that's pretty cool. So give us an idea of what your day's like today. I mean, you go from a guy that's kind of behind the scenes before, and now you're the voice, that's being, projected out. And so it sounds like a somewhat of a pivot, but, give us an idea of what your day looks like now.
Yeah, and it was very weird to be in front of the camera, holding the microphone and actually interviewing people. That was a big change for me because I was a producer for 20 years. I always wanted to be an on-air guy, but I realized early on that probably wasn't going to happen. So I kind of just pushed that to the side and went and pursued producing. And so to be on air, that's a big change for me because I don't know if I'm any good, to be honest with you. I mean, I trust that if people are telling me and they're enjoying the show, and we have 2 million downloads of the podcast, so people are listening to it, then that tells me, okay, the guest must be really good, and I'm just going to do my best to facilitate what they have to say and keep going. And nobody's told me that, you can't do this anymore. So as long as I can do it, I'm going to keep doing it. But I love it. Like I said, I'm in the middle of my dream job, but it takes a lot more discipline now than ever because I'm working from home. I'm working solo. I have a team. We have 15 of us that are in our small little team with Sports Spectrum. But the majority of those people are scattered around the country, and with about 10 of them based in Denver, Colorado. So I'm spending time a lot like this on Zoom calls, meetings, just to make sure that we're talking and we're having conversations. But I'm running and managing my own hours every day. And so it is easy to just get on at 1 o'clock and stop at 4 and we're good. And, I could easily do that and nobody would ever find out, right? As long as I was getting my work done. But that's not how I roll. I try to every day wake up at the same time, start work at the same time, and close work at the same time. Now, in the middle, there's a lot going on, but that's what I try to do. So I wake up at 5:30 every morning, and I have from 5:30 basically till about 8 o'clock to do whatever I want that doesn't involve work. So for me, there's time with God, there's prayer, there's reading, there's going for walks, which I do every day for about an hour or so, listening to podcasts during that walk, listening to music, mostly podcasts though, and trying to get better. Honestly, when I'm on my walk, like I'm trying to shut out the world, but at the same time, I'm listening to people like Joe Rogan and Bill Simmons and, some Christian podcasts like Carrie Nieuwhof and some others, Annie F. Downs, who are amazing interviewers. And I just want to get better as an interviewer, but I also want to be kind of learning things and being entertained too. And so I look at this time, that hour to hour 15 walk in the morning, as time for me to get away and get some exercise, but also to try and get better at my job without really trying to get better at my job, just listening, right? So then I come back and I have breakfast and I, get cleaned up and here we are. And I start the day at 8:15, 8:30 every single day. And I get in my laptop and I kind of have a plan, and I utilize, Kyle, my I guess you call it the calendar app on your phone, but on my laptop as well. And I remind myself for everything in there. So at 9:30 today, it was prep for this guest. And so I'll put this prep sheet together. I'll put their background. I'll start thinking about the questions I want to ask and put that together. At 10:30 or 11 or whatever, or the time that we were supposed to do our interview, that's our interview. So that's in there. I know I have meetings this afternoon that I don't normally have on other days because today is that day when we have those meetings. I also know today I don't have any interviews to record myself, but tomorrow and Wednesday I do. So let's make sure that I'm prepared for those days. So there's a lot going on. I also edit and produce a few other podcasts for us. So there's some of that editing that I use and going back into those skills that I had for years and making sure that those podcasts are in place and set to go. It's creating the content on our website. It's editing social media clips. You know, we're a small team, so I'm doing probably the job of about 5 people if I was at ESPN. But that's okay. I love what I get to do. And then, like I said, you know, find breaks in the middle for some lunch and just to kind of go and get stretched out or whatever. But for the most part, staying in work time during work. And then when it's done, being able to stop work and go focus on what I need to focus on, which is my family, which is my church, which is just time away from work. That, for me now at this stage of my life, is so important. And that doesn't mean I don't record a podcast at 8 o'clock at night sometimes based upon who's available, or maybe even on a weekend. Sometimes I'll do a little work. But I know now, because of the job I have, that I can control a little bit more what and when I do my work. And my bosses are really great at understanding and trusting that I'm not going to take advantage of the fact that I can work from home and you know, make sure I'm getting the job done. I'm even over communicating more to them now because they don't see me every day versus when I was at ESPN. When I was at ESPN, you know, there's 4,000 people at the campus, and I'm seeing my bosses and my colleagues every single day going into work. Now I don't really see anybody in person unless I travel to Denver or travel to another place for an event to cover or whatever. For the most part, I'm here at my desk here in Connecticut on my laptop. And so you have to over communicate to make sure that they know, hey, I care about my job. I'm putting, you know, it's impossible for them to kind of say, oh, Jason isn't doing the job, because my job is so public with the podcasts. So if all of a sudden they come to work this week and there's no podcasts, well, we got a problem. But there's not. There's one today. There's one Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's another podcast coming out tomorrow. So they see that I'm churning out this work. And anybody who knows this world knows it's not something you just do in 5 minutes and it's done and everything's all set. Like, it takes work, preparation, editing, research, all of that to make sure that a show goes off and stays successful. So that's kind of how I view my job.
There's 2 things I want to add to that. One, we know you're doing a good job because you mentioned how your boss called you one night in your book and said, hey, I really enjoyed gave you feedback. So that was cool. You know, that piece of encouragement.
Yes, it was.
And the other part was just how you were always making yourself better. You know, from the moment you wake up, you're trying to make yourself better. So hopefully people are picking up on those things, connecting the dots, because, you know, I'm just eating up the stuff that you're saying, because that's the stuff that's really going to help people, you know, get better. I mean, these simple things you're doing.
Kyle, by the way, it took me a while to get that. Let's just be clear. I mean, it's not like I had this, you know, figured out 20, 30 years ago. It's where I am now in my stage that I figured out, okay, this is what works for me. It might work for you. You might find a different place or a different rhythm or discipline that works for you that maybe doesn't work for me in the stage of life that I'm in. But this is where we are. And, it's important, though. Discipline, I think, at all stages of our journey is important. One other thing I'll say, Kyle, that's really important that I don't think I harped on too much is rest. It is so important to be able to turn off your brain. And it's very hard when we have our phones in our hand all the time to turn off our brains. And I'm not very good at it, but I think that's where those walks are for me, that I can turn on. I mean, I know I'm still listening to podcasts and trying to get better, but it's also a time of rest and not rushing and not being in a hurry and not trying to meet a deadline. And that's so important for our health, I think, to be able to go forward and continue to be great in what work we're doing, is to be able to turn it off, even just a little bit each and every day.
No, I'm with you. And, same, with my experience in this, the personal development space, even if, I look back and think, man, I wish I would have started reading much earlier, like
seriously, right?
Intentionally reading and listening to podcasts. Because that's the other thing. Some people are like, well, I don't like to read. It's like, well, now you can listen to them. To invest in your mind, I mean, that's one of those things like, man, I wish I would have done that when I was 25, not 35, so.
And take notes. I mean, I know this is another thing that I do a lot of, but like, just keep a notebook around.
Yeah.
and write. I know it's old school, put it in your notes app if you want to do it on your phone, but I like to write stuff down. A lot of times I'm just writing stuff for work, but sometimes I'll write like a quote. I'll write something from my faith. I'll write something, some piece of encouragement, whatever it is. I just write stuff here. This was a quote: broken hearts can't be mended if they're left unattended. It's like, whoa. So I wrote that down, and this is just in a regular notebook. It's not in some sort of massive organized diary or something like that, but just keep a notebook next to you. I always say, because you're going to find a nugget or two that you can write down every single day.
Yeah, no doubt, Jason. And I know I could talk to you for hours about just this stuff, your time at ESPN, your book, what you're doing today. But again, I want to respect your time and let you get on with your day, since we are approaching our time limit anyway, so you can actually get back to some real work. But I appreciate your time, and I hope to do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely, Kyle. Anytime you want, buddy. This has been great, and I hope it encourages all those that got to watch and listen. Thanks.
And thank you for checking out this channel. If you found this content beneficial, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone you think might find it beneficial as well, because this channel was simply started and created to serve you, to help others grow, to learn how other successful TV journalists do or did it. So take what serves you so you can get better faster and reach your next level.